Hi everyone, I'm Tanya Kuptanani Vatsa. I'm the founder and CEO of Elixir Wellness, and I'm here today for a really special episode of Spilling Facts. This is episode 11 on sports recovery with John Gloster. For those of you who don't know John, he's a well-renowned name in sports science today. He's the head physiotherapist, the medical coordinator, and so much more for many international athletes, Olympians, and the Rajasthan Royals team. I'd love to have John introduce himself and tell us about his journey and how he got to where he is today.
Well, thank you. And I'm always excited to have conversations about things that, we're all interested in. And I think that's going to help a lot of people, not just our athlete population. Absolutely. So thank you for having me. Thank you for the opportunity to impart some knowledge, hopefully, and a few insights into my world.
Looking forward to it.
20 years. My journey in India has been 20 years now, 2004. In the subcontinent, 24 years, believe it or not, because I had 4 years in Bangladesh prior to India. So I'm almost, you could call me part of the furniture of not just Bombay, but greater India. But my real journey started in this world and my love of sport as a sports person right through school, university at a quite high level.
Okay. Having
toured overseas with teams and realizing at some point that journey was going to stop and in the actual playing arena, but can I continue to contribute outside of that? So the most obvious thing was to move into the world of sports physio, sports medicine, sports science. But there was a journey to that as well. I actually really was interested in doing law at one stage. But then having had a year off after graduating from school, and my friends who then went on to do law, it didn't look as appealing as I thought it was when I first dreamt about it. So I ended up doing a BA and majoring in geomorphology, believe it or not, and a few other sort of related topics in the world of geophysics and various things. So to get to the physio side of it and the sports sort of science side of it was via that route, but understanding that I had this love and this desire to continue to interact with the sporting population and see if we can impact change for them at a team level, individual level, but then ultimately at an ecosystem level as well. And the place for that I felt where I could have most impact is probably somewhere like India. I did have experience in Australia, the Australian Institute of Sport, with various sporting teams, living in England and working with cricket, elite level cricket in England for 4 years as well. But in terms of impact and taking my learnings from those environments and bringing it into an environment that was probably at a stage where it was open to change. When I first came to India with the Indian cricket team in 2004-05, it was on the cusp of change. And in fact, I think India on the whole was more open now to appreciating fitness and wellness. It's certainly the space that you're in. Even though it was in its infancy, it really needed individuals to sort of take that mantle and run with it for a while. And I believe that cricket was the perfect vehicle to do that, given the visibility that cricket has in this world. And could I bring value not just to the cricket team and the players and therefore performance outcomes for them, but was there a bigger picture at play where ultimately that was going to flow out and flow down into benefiting the rest of the population? So I hope that, 20 years later, we're seeing some of those fruits being born now as to this appreciation that fitness and wellness is not just confined to our sporting population.
Absolutely. And I'm seeing that. I see...
Well, you just look at Marine Drive on a Friday night, just, the people that are running and jogging, and, that wasn't there when I first came in 2004. Okay. So you're seeing obvious changes in the population. 100%. Pick up the newspaper, page 3.
Who have an interest in health and wellness. So there are, it's not a big population yet. I would say people still walk in for their facials and their IVs more than anything. But even the acceptance of IV therapy, for example, in the last couple of years.
Incredibly.
And then there's a cohort that have gone abroad, done treatments there, and then know about it and come back and ask. So that we're seeing a lot of it. Even a year and a half ago wasn't there. It's a big jump in the last couple of years, especially post-COVID.
Because it's outcome driven. People see outcomes. And so they therefore say, well, if it's available overseas, why can't it be available here? And we benefit from those outcomes. And I always talk about So all of this was pioneered in the elite sports space. You're probably aware that most of the new innovations, technologies, and learnings that you're using in this clinic were born out of the elite sports space, trying to improve performance, minimize injury risks, to improve sports longevity for a sports person. It pioneered all that in that space, and now that's filtering back to benefit the larger population. I still believe, and I often talk about, that's one of my roles, is to take that learning and democratize it to some extent. So that things like diabetes and understanding, energy systems and how we use various fuels, your CGM monitors, all this, that's where it started. But actually the real benefit we're now seeing in the population at large.
Amazing. So when you're working with an athlete, I know there's a line between what's right for them in terms of their health and longevity and what's right for them in terms of their performance. Yeah. How do you strike that balance to make sure you're giving them the ability to function at their optimum while still maintaining their longevity and making sure that they're healthy?
By having insight, really. And I always say to any athlete that I'm working with, whether it be a team, an individual, whoever, is that, yes, I'm concerned about your performance outcomes now and minimizing injury risk and improving your short-term performance. But actually, I always have to have one eye on your long-term health outcomes, because the decisions that I'm making for you now on your behalf may impact you negatively going forward. We need to consider that. So how do I minimize that risk in the future? And it comes from insight. My understanding and intimate insight into things like bloods, and metabolic markers that we use, wearable technologies, from Oura rings to CGMs to, various tracking devices that we use on our athletes. And from that insight, I can then make better informed decisions. So, for example, one of the key learnings we had over the last probably 10 or 15 years that we've been using blood tests on our athletes is the shocking state of prediabetes even in the elite athlete cohort. So between 20 and 25% of all athletes that I've tested over the last sort of 15 years are in the pre-diabetic range.
Oh, wow.
So you can imagine and that's your highly mobile, highly functioning elite athlete cohort. So you can imagine what the numbers are in the general population.
Absolutely.
It's about 67% to be precise. But what I'm saying is that we are therefore taking that insight and acting on it immediately. Yeah. Because that is a cohort we need to protect. But I still need to get their performance outcomes. Absolutely. So it all comes back to insight. And the more I know about an athlete or an individual, the more I can impact on them. So that's been the biggest game changer for us, is the ability to get greater insight and therefore be more impactful, but always with one eye on the big picture outcomes. And particularly in not just an athletic cohort here, but also in the problems we have as a general population in the subcontinent with obesity, diabetes, and some of the other metabolic diseases that we're seeing. And most of the impact for those individuals starts when they're younger. So decisions they're making around lifestyle, around food, around nutrition, around hydration, this is the bigger picture problem. It's starting when they're much younger. Okay. So we have control over that environment. Yes. We have control over that domain. We have control over what they eat, when they eat, how they train, what their markers say. And it would be negligent of us knowing that if we don't impact on it and make the decisions for them to help them in the long run.
So outside of monitoring tools, what are the sports recovery tools that you're using with elite? I'm sure there's those.
Again, there's so much, because we have so much more insight, we now know where we need to be more impactful. So we've got to break down recovery and what it looks like for an athlete, say for a cricketer, for example, is we almost look at it like a product stack. Okay. And what are the things in the product stack of a recovery, things that are available to us that we should access and therefore implement for an athlete. And we look at what are the things that we consider to be the most important. And you will have had this conversation probably with previous guests, is that if you want to pick out one of those things that we think is important out of our product stack that we want to impact, it's probably sleep. And, the conversations we personally had about sleep previously means that it is of great importance to you, me, and everybody, and as it should be.
Absolutely.
Because that is probably the biggest, or has the potential to have the greatest impact on either positive or negative performance outcomes, and therefore injury, etc. So that is something that we do target. And how do we target that? Everything from the garments we wear to the strategies in place in the hotel rooms, and there are a lot better sleep experts to talk to you about that. But for me, is educating the player on the importance of sleep and why it is so important to us in terms of your performance, but also, again, considering your long-term health outcomes. So that's where the wearable technologies have become really, really valuable for us to start the conversation with these athletes around why sleep is important. So the Oura Rings, your Whoop Band, some of these technologies that we've been using with our players has allowed me to now say to a player, okay, we consider sleep to be really important. Let's have a look at your sleep.
Okay.
And let's break down some of the data. So an athlete will go to bed and wake up 9 hours later and say, right, I've had my 9 hours sleep. All's good to go. Okay. But actually, when you look at the quality of that sleep, their restlessness, the number of times they turn over in bed, what percentage of that is REM, what percentage of that is light, what percentage of that is deep. Deep sleep is really important for athletes because that's where physical recovery takes place. You know all this. Some of your strategies here is designed to impact on those. REM, particularly for their cognitive function, and educating them on what impacts on those specific sleep cycles, what you eat before you go to bed, when you eat before you go to bed, things like alcohol, the impact, on REM sleep, on deep sleep, overall sleep. So it's been a fantastic tool for us to educate them on the why. Why do I tell you not to eat under 3 hours before you go to bed? Why do I tell you not to have a high glycemic load before you go to bed? Why do I tell you not to have alcohol before you go to bed? Because it impacts significantly on 2 or 3 key markers that we look at. One being heart rate variability. Yes. That's a really important one for us in terms of understanding your autonomic nerve. And 3 is the impact on your REM and deep sleep patterns. So once they understand this, they immediately engaged in that one critical recovery process that we believe to be the pillar or the foundation. So that would be one. The next one, which sort of ties nicely into that, is nutrition. Okay. So nutrition plays a huge part in recovery. And one, because you need to refuel, you need to be anti-inflammatory, you need to be antioxidized, but also what and when you eat impacts on sleep. So educating them on the nutrition and putting strategies in place for that. And then we have a whole host of other things that you'll be aware of and see a part of your protocols here is obviously cryotherapy is a big one. Red light therapy is another big one for us. Massage, active, what we call active warm downs, active recovery. That could be in a pool environment, could be walking, could be a number of things. Hydration and then monitoring hydration, critical to recovery, critical to sleep, critical to everything else, repair. Then the nutrition, and then we come down into monitoring sleep and impacting on that. So there are probably 8 or 10 things that come into my protocol, and we make sure that at least 4 of those are non-negotiables. Okay. So that might be nutrition, hydration, non-negotiables.
Sleep, I'm sure.
Managing their sleep is another non-negotiable. And then things like, using the masseurs, using the red light therapy panels, using the even the recovery garments that they sleep in. So they're the things that we think, if you can pick out 3 or 4 of these and we implement them, your chances of performance improvements are significantly greater. And chances of getting injured is reduced. So therefore, it's a no-brainer for you as an elite level athlete.
So when it comes to nutrition specifically, what part of, I'm sure their nutrition is very tailored and detailed, what part of that do you think can be adapted by the general population, especially given the disease profile we're seeing now in our country?
Pretty well all of it, because there are certain themes that we set out for them that we know are important to them as an athlete, but it's just as important to you as, a general person in everyday life. So the general themes that I work on are anti-inflammatory, number one.
Okay.
We know that inflammation is the source of all disease. We know inflammation is the source of all injury, all recovery, it is all built around inflammation. So if you can at least bring that understanding into everyday life, is mitigating inflammation at the best and best way that you can. And then
would that be through sugar monitoring and your
yeah. So then you look at things. What are the things that inflame my system? And you just hit the nail on the head with one of them, and probably the key driver is I was just looking at your CGM. So yeah. So what are the foods that impact me from a sugar load perspective? So reducing your load of sugar, reducing your load of processed foods, reducing your loads of highly processed foods, and the other thing that we're finding is really impactful from an inflammatory perspective is a lot of the cooking mediums that we cook in today, and being more aware of what are the inflammatory ones that potentially can damage you both now as an athlete trying to recover, but also long term. So we're trying to educate them on removing things like, seed oils from their diets because they're extremely inflammatory.
Absolutely.
And therefore oxidative stress. So trying to remove those is critical. Replacing that with more sensible anti-inflammatory cooking agents and mediums. And then looking at the nutrition in itself is that what are you fueling your system with? One was the carbohydrates, processed foods, sugars side. And then bringing into play your anti-inflammatory foods, so your omega-3s, your berries, your really, again, it's the quality of produce that we're looking at, which we need to consider as well. But think about foods that are going to have the anti-inflammatory, oxidative effect, and so that would be the sort of one of the main themes that we run with. And then the other theme that I try and get them to sort of consider is the 2 R's, which is real food, which again fits into what we just talked about. So real food, if it comes in a box or a Tetra Pak or a Ziploc packet or something, then that's not real food.
Absolutely.
Okay? So, and I remember, I can't remember who it was, somebody, I remember reading once that they said that when you walk into a supermarket, you either go straight ahead or left or right. Don't take anything from the middle. Okay. Because in a classic supermarket overseas, particularly, is that straight ahead when you're into the doors will be all the dairy sort of meats.
Yes. And then on the sides is your
sides will be the delis, fruits, vegetable section, So
and your cereals in the rest.
Yeah, or crackers in the middle if you want to look at it that way. But effectively that's how we look at it. I
literally just did this with my daughter on Sunday morning.
It's a great educational
we went for a tennis session. We stopped by here because I wanted to hit the sauna. It's the only time I get to do this on Sunday. She kept going in and out because she kept asking, why are you wet? And I was like, I'm literally sweating out
everything
right now. And
sauna's another great recovery piece.
Absolutely. I have started using it recently, and it is the number one thing that gets my HRV up. And I've gone from an average...
Or you heat shock proteins and start looking at some of the other effects.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So, protective stuff.
I know that I stopped alcohol completely because that drops that and the sleep the most. I don't think I've had it.
It does.
Almost literally.
Heart rate variability plummets and resting heart rates go up. And your deep sleep profile.
Tossing and turning the whole night. Amazing. Feeling miserable the next day.
And that's what these rings tell you. That's what your wearables tell you. You'd never known that otherwise.
And Whoop actually gives you like a page, and I recorded a video for my own page, which I haven't posted yet. I literally did this yesterday with screenshots from the Whoop, because as I'm talking about things that impact my HRV, it's late meals, it's alcohol, it's more than like the stress being more than a certain level, and I've not managed to get it down with the breathing and stuff, because then I know my resting heart rate is going to be up all night. If I have one, and I'm someone who used to enjoy like my whiskey, but never a binge drinker, that one glass, I realized that I'm tachycardic half the night.
That's right.
So I'm
really impacts me as well.
Comfortable and I'm breathless, and so that's the reason I stopped. But the sauna is the one thing. So when I've gone from like a year ago when I started wearing the Whoop, my median HRV was 30.
Yep.
I hit a 78
No way.
this Monday.
Maybe I should go and try this.
Just after the sauna. It's literally the one thing that
Fantastic.
that's the
We
hardest.
encourage our players to use that as part of their
So that's
recovery.
been brilliant for me. I also sleep in the ball athletics
There you go.
to get
Fantastic.
my
So there you go.
hours
So
in. Yeah.
see how that impacts on heart rate variability, which is what, because these are the 1%ers for athletes. That difference between having a heart rate variability at night of, say, a 70 versus a 50
Yeah.
is the 1% difference on the field tomorrow
Yeah.
in terms of performance. And everything comes down to 1% these days.
Absolutely.
Games are lost in, one on centimetres and millimetres these days. And then the other thing that, coming back to the food piece, is regional. I think we've got to get smarter about regional and seasonal foods. And I think we've got to be, particularly within India, because it's a very large country. And there are specific genetic differences between each region. So what a Bengali eats is very different to and the way their body sort of manufactures it, processes it, and deals with it is very different to a Gujarati, to a Tamil, to a Keralite, to a Maharashtrian or a Punjabi. So you've got to realize that when you're setting a lot of these nutritional plans for players, you have to consider region and satisfying certain, like for example, a lot of the South Indians, particularly the sort of the Tamil Nadu guys and down in Karnataka south, their tolerances, particularly on CGM readings for rice, is very, very different.
Oh, really?
To those from up north. Whereas those from up north respond quite differently to things like some of the grains. So you've got to be like your wheat and things like that. So you've got to be really understand this regional approach to we had one of the Olympians actually who struggled for a long time with gut issues.
Okay.
And even though he has spent his life in Bangalore and Hyderabad, and his parents, when we did the research and we were sort of trying to fuel him on things that we felt were healthy options for him, both from the Western diet as well as the regional from there. Yeah. When we traced him back genetically, he's actually from Kerala. Well, generations ago.
Okay.
And then when we started substituting with a Kerala-based diet, all his tummy problems went away. So we need to get smarter at that. Okay. So regional becomes a really important piece for me. Okay. And that's easy.
That's really
It's actually one of the easiest things to do. So regional, seasonal, and real. So they're my three mantras because they all feed into my other umbrella piece of anti-inflammatory. So if you can keep it real, you can keep it regional, you're going to satisfy my anti-inflammatory piece anyway.
Noticed on the CGM, I guess that comes to your original piece, the one thing that spikes my sugar the most, even more than a glass of normal Coke, and I don't have that often. I think I was very sleep deprived a month ago and tossing and turning all night, and I had like my Crocin with a couple of sips of Coke, and of course got a spike. Yeah. But what spiked me more than that was dosa.
So what was what's your original genetic root?
I'm Sindhi.
You're Sindhi, so you're from the complete opposite end of the geographical scale for and that's my point being is that you would probably tolerate some of the grains in terms of a spike or glucose load response. Yeah, so that's just what I'm saying.
It was so shocked. My son and I walked from the restaurant to the office. Yeah. We'd the day off. He was sitting here with me. And I couldn't believe the reading when I got out. Yeah. So I was like, you know what?
We're
walking.
Try and at least get some of that into my muscle. Let's get my little glycolysis pathway functioning.
I believe that more than a Coke or more than a piece of chocolate or a dessert, which now I'm very particular about if I'm having.
But see, this is fascinating insight. Why should my athletes only have that information?
Absolutely.
So why you've done this on your own, you've explored your own, but you have to amplify this because you are exactly representative of pretty much everybody in India. And just having that insight. See, most people who are diabetic don't even know what makes their blood glucose go up. I've been to some of these hospitals, look at their diabetic meals. Have you ever been to one of the hospitals to set a diabetic meal here?
Yes.
It's frightening.
I have.
They have oats in the morning, they have a banana, and they have toast.
Jelly and custard.
Oats, banana, and toast for breakfast. There's a glucose load there of probably equivalent of 15 to 20 teaspoons.
On the side.
Which is frightening. So, and I ask people, I say, do you understand what, in the simplest of terms, what is type 2 diabetes? It's basically inability to control blood glucose. Okay, so if that's the case, because either you've got too much insulin or you're insulin resistant, or your pancreas is just not producing enough. So therefore, why would I fuel myself with something that just keeps my blood glucose up all day? But most people don't even know what it is that elevates their blood glucose. So getting back to the basics of education and knowing what makes your blood glucose go up. And that's where the CGM has become such a valuable education tool. And I know not everybody can access a CGM, but common sense is the other tool we need to start tapping into a lot more. As proper research-based education to the general population.
Like the understanding that the order of the food is impacting.
Yeah, when you eat, what do you eat first on your plate?
Yeah, I mean that's
buffer, buffering. We don't even understand buffering. And that's another conversation.
But have like a piece of chocolate after a meal. I did it last night. I had a piece of jaggery chocolate and had absolutely no spike because I had my fiber, I had my salad, and then
your little lining's already done on your tummy.
I can have a small piece of chocolate because I know it's not going to spike anything, given the fiber and the protein that's gone in.
See, this is. And I'm finding I'm having to educate even our highest level athletes on some of this stuff, the basic stuff. Yeah. Why don't I want them drinking loads of fruit juices in the morning? You and I have been told our whole lives that fruit juice is fantastic for kids, and but we now know that it's metabolically processed exactly the same as alcohol, identical to alcohol. So, and the byproduct of fructose metabolism, because it occurs in the liver, it doesn't occur anywhere else, is elevated triglycerides, uric acid, which is another big one, which is a big no-no for athletes, and liver fat. So, in fact, if you look in the Middle East and New Zealand, they're even looking at banning, I think they may have already done it, banning fruit juices in preschools and canteens at schools, because that's the gateway drug.
They really should. I'm constantly having this argument with my kids.
Yeah. And because you've concentrated the fructose. Fructose is a toxin to the human body. That's why it's shunted straight to the liver where it's processed and has metabolic priority of the liver, as does alcohol. So why don't we know that? Why have we been saying, because you're not eating the fiber with it, which as you say, mitigates the uptake into the bloodstream and dampens that. So eat the whole fruit is my point. I'm happy to eat the whole fruit.
I still see it. Like this morning I had chia and almond milk, and then I had oats with raisin, but literally like one spoon, because I'm reading more and more about how oats are not as great as they say.
Have you seen an oat milk spike on your? Have you ever tried doing oat milk?
No.
Because the same spike as Coca-Cola.
And so then I had my kiwi, and my kiwi from 3 will give me a spike, but I get up and I walk. 15 minutes.
Or you must have something before you kiwi.
No, so I'm having these one after the other, with the kiwi being the last.
Okay.
So that
mitigates it. So it's fascinating. So back to my original point is that that's why I'm glad you're doing this podcast, and I'm glad you're educating people on some of the basics of, because the basics of nutrition is not hard.
Yeah.
It's been bastardized over the years. Quite frankly, it has been. And what's been put out into the public domain is almost criminal. Yeah. So it is up to responsible individuals like yourself and myself and the Marcus Rannies of the world and these guys to actually put it straight, that this is what we need to do. We're keeping it simple. Yeah. We've got data to prove this. There's research to prove it that has now been surfaced and again, not impacted by big food and big pharma. And,
absolutely.
I know that's another topic, but what I'm saying is that the general population deserves to have access to this information for their better health, long-term health outcomes.
So when it comes to supplementation for the athletes, I know that's a big topic. We've discussed this before. What do your typical athletes normally take, and what from that would you recommend to the general population?
I don't know if people saw my eyebrows raised on the podcast when you mentioned that. But the reason why I did that is because, not that I'm against supplements, not at all. They play a huge role, and I'll explain why in a minute. But because of the world of the athlete,
information that's really
a lot of information, misinformation. But the biggest issue I have is the danger of supplementation for athletes because of the anti-doping component, and obviously overuse is another big one. Yes. But there is a enormous role that supplementation plays, and I think going forward, sensible supplementation is going to play an even bigger role. And the reason for that is because we are just not getting the required levels anymore of micronutrients and all the goodies out of our food sources because of soil adulteration, because of chemicals. So a lot of plants that would normally be a fantastic source. I can tell you to go and eat broccoli to get more magnesium, but you're having to eat 3 times the amount now to get the same amount you did 30 years ago. So, and in those cases, okay, we may need to supplement safely, but you never supplement on the back of no information.
Absolutely.
And so that's where insight again comes back to the core of pretty much everything we do is on the back of insight. And how do we get insight? We get insight from blood tests, from wearable. So I think there's a place for sensible supplementation, and the key ones that we look at is, and if you want to look at this from under a heading of what I term of diseases of deficiency, and we all know that term, and if you understand that in the general population, now extrapolate that to our elite athlete population, it's far more impactful for them, because if they're depleted in certain, key elements, then the potential impact because of the way they stress their bodies is far greater in terms of a negative outcome. So we need to monitor them very closely.
Okay.
And some of the normal ranges that you might consider, for something like a D3 or a B12 or some of those, is not a normal range for an elite level athlete. So having that understanding before you supplement is also critical. Okay. But what we try and look at is we obviously through their blood tests and look first of all at their main deficiencies and whether that's going to impact potentially on their performance and injury, and supplementing appropriately for that. And then again, you need to follow up and retest and monitor. So the other piece is the whole protein piece, and there's a lot of controversy around that. And should it be plant-based? Should it be not? Should it be, how much bioavailability have we got? And there's a lot of sound science around that now, and why we're leaning.
There's a lot of controversy now on protein shakes as well.
Yeah. So again, we got to ask the question: why are we doing it? What are we trying to supplement? Is it appropriate for this level of athlete? Is their liver and kidney capable of processing that molecule? And also, another thing is the relationship of an insulin response to protein as well. Okay. People don't realize that. People only think that carbohydrates produce an insulin response, but actually protein does a little bit as well. Okay. So if your aim is to really dampen down your insulin, then taking loads of protein can have the opposite effect also. So keep that in mind. But for me, it's more the dangers around protein. And there was a study that was done a few years ago here where across all of the off-the-shelf products, protein products were available, 60% of them were adulterated.
Oh, wow.
So that's a huge number. So that makes my job enormously difficult, because I have to say to an athlete, okay, you do need protein supplementation because of what you're doing and the loads you're under, etc. But my opportunity to get a safe product is limited. Yeah. So I now have to go to only one source who imports on the back of only batch tested, informed sport, has to approve products that otherwise I can't guarantee to my athlete that they're not going to come on positive on a drug test, or they're not going to become ill because of the supplements. So knowing your supply chain, knowing your sources, knowing your batch tests, it's as you do with a lot of your products here.
Absolutely.
You're very particular about that, and you do that because you want to protect your client.
100%.
Same with me. My job is to protect my athlete. That's my client, and giving them the best information and make sure that I'm delivering on the number one thing that all of us need to deliver on, and that's safety.
Okay.
Of course, every single one of our high-performance sports science domains, whether it be nutrition, whether it be physio, whether it be strength and conditioning, whether it be sports psychology, whatever it is, number one is safety.
Absolutely.
The question you have to ask, first of all, is this safe for my athlete?
Okay.
If the answer is maybe, then it's a no. And we go back and revisit why.
Okay.
Okay, you would do exactly the same thing, I'm sure, in your profession.
Absolutely.
Okay, so you're delivering so many recovery protocols, performance strategies within this environment that you need to be asking exactly the same question that I probably ask.
For sure.
Everybody in my circle as well. You've got your own little ecosystem of support here that you need to trust, and you need to be able to do diligence on and expect that to come back with a healthy green tick.
So my next question to you actually is coming back to a bit of what we've discussed, which is metrics like HRV, VO2 max. We're flooded now with information, partly because of wearables, partly because people are more aware of what's going on in their bodies, which is a great thing because it gives us insight. What are the metrics that the average person can track through wearables or any of the tech that they have access to, but which are the ones that are important because there is a lot of noise?
Again, I think we overcomplicate this space sometimes because we have so much information.
Yeah.
And I always say that, particularly with our athletes, is that we get so much data on them. Sometimes you forget, because there is so much data and inside information on them, is that there is a human being attached to that data. And sometimes that's the most important thing, not the data at all. It's the actual individual. And appreciating that they've got emotions and anxieties and all the things, day-to-day troubles that all of us have.
True.
So the data can give you a certain layer of insight.
Okay.
But it has to be married against the individual, the actual individual, the real human being, the flesh and bones at the other end of that information. Otherwise, you're losing sight of why you're doing it in the first place, because you want to be impactful on that person.
Absolutely.
So it's got to match that. But for me, given that we now have access to technology and wearables, I think the sleep tracking one is probably the most valuable because of the impact that sleep then has on every other thing. Yes. Poor sleep means elevated cortisol. Yeah. Elevated cortisol means weight gain, all your inflammatory markers go up. So managing and then what that does is that opens the question. So once you track sleep, then it opens the questions of, okay, how do I then impact sleep? As I said before. Yeah. Okay, then you say, nutrition. What am I eating? When am I eating? So you then take control over an entire sort of area of your own recovery and high performance monitoring, which is really critical. You have to be empowered to do that. And if you're empowered to do it and you have the information, you will then embrace it. Okay. And then compliance, which is normally the most difficult thing to get anybody, athlete, is compliance. Sure. Then compliance goes up. Because not only do they understand it, they also now seeing outcomes from it. And they can manipulate those outcomes by various interventions on the back of that information. So for me, that would be one of the key ones. Look, for somebody, there are various trackers now to give you baseline VO2 max. But how relevant is that to you and me walking down the street and going on an evening stroll? Probably not a lot. But I do think underlying message for everybody, and this is why some of these trackers are really useful, is that I need people to move. If you're not moving, you're descending rapidly. If you're not moving, then you are going to exaggerate a lot of problems. Okay. So I think that's why step trackers and managing steps and being aware of steps, I think, is really critical. So for me, having that feedback that, I did that yesterday, but I didn't do it today, but so tomorrow I will, is just that little reminder that how important movement is. They don't need to know why. They don't necessarily need to know that if I move, then this system functions better, these muscles activate better, that's But the numbers tell us, the more you move, the better you are.
Absolutely.
Okay? And I don't care what sort of movement it is. I don't care. I don't care if it's dancing, whether it's walking, whether it's jogging, whether it's swimming, whether it's cycling. I don't care as long as you're moving. Because if you're moving, you're living. It's simple. The minute you sit down, things literally start to go downhill. So my message to everybody, from a young kid to the 95-year-old at home, is that you have to move. Okay, we'll find a way within the constraints of either your age or your physical capability. We'll find a way to make you move. There's certain things that with strategy we can put in place to do that. But movement has to be at the core of everything. It's at the core of life. It's at the core of learning. It's at the core of cognitive function. It's the core of process, cognitive processing. Movement is at the core of everything. So there's one thing that people should do.
It's move.
It's just move more. And so if you can get the sleep piece right, and you can move more, you're 90% of the way there.
That's amazing. That's really good to know. And I think especially because I don't know how many people get into the depth of the information like we do, but there's so much information now on muscle and muscle health and how that's your key to longevity, more than any tool, more than anything else.
So if you wanted me to put in a third thing there, particularly for our over 40 cohort, it would be to introduce some form of resistance training.
Okay.
Because there's some seriously good science around strength and longevity.
Okay.
It doesn't have to mean, I'm not talking about going into the gym and picking up massive weights, but you'll probably end up in the grave quicker than anybody if you do that and drop one of those on your head. But it just means do some sort of body weight resistance training, whether it be some squats or some lunges or some push-ups or whatever it may be. If you can add in things like resistance bands and whatever, they're great. But resistance training should be an integral part. So let's put sleep in there, let's put movement in there, and then resistance training. I think you'd be pretty good to go.
So when it comes to your health and fitness mantras for yourself, what do you follow apart from these three, which I'm sure you're doing?
Yeah.
Well?
So I track myself very closely.
Okay.
And I get very upset if I don't meet what I think is my normal walking, sort of daily walking. Because for me, walking is really important. Bombay's not a great city to run unless you go to the club or you've got access to some tracks or something. Walking is by far the next best thing. So I try and walk everywhere. When I travel and when we're on tour with the teams, I try and swim. So swimming for me is a really big, and I encourage as many people to swim as possible because swimming is one of those skills. So I come from Australia and 90% of the Australian population lives by the sea. And so swimming is compulsory. Yeah. As kids, every kid has to learn to swim. It's compulsory.
Amazing.
So, and one of the reasons why it is compulsory, and this is a good learning for India, I think, number one is safety. If you fall in the water, you're not going to drown.
Yes.
I get so upset when I see every single day I pick up the newspaper and this kid drowned here, this kid drowned there. None of them can swim. And adults who fall into a pond and they can't get out because so safety number one. Two is social. Okay. If you don't swim or you can't swim in a country like Australia, you're left out of a lot of socialing because so much revolves around the sea. The sea, the beach, the surf, the water skiing, the rivers, the lakes, the kayaking, whatever. It's all around water. So you're left out of a lot of social environments if you don't swim. And the third is for fitness. If you don't swim, and also if you don't cycle, and the stats tell us if you haven't learned to swim or cycle by a teenager, it's very, very rare that you actually take it up as an adult to learn to swim or cycle. So you now are moving to very, very critical things that allow you to stay fit and healthy for life. So if you've got walking, but you've got swimming and cycling, you've got three avenues to be fit and healthy for life. So I'd encourage everybody to teach their kids to swim. If you want a long-term health outcome for them, teach them to ride a bike and teach them to swim. And if you're an adult, go out and teach yourself how to swim because it gives you an incredible opportunity for all those three things that we just talked about. And then competition. So competitive swimming is a really important thing in Australia. And it's becoming more important in India. Some great swimmers. We had three at the Olympics just recently, Paralympians, So for us to have them on an international stage promoting swimming as safety, social, health, and competition, I think is wonderful as well. So they're my go-to. Nutrition I'm really particular about. Okay. Again, I stick to the mantra, anti-inflammatory, regional, and real as much as I can, and I avoid wheat. Okay. Modern wheat, or if you've got got access to the ancient Emma grain wheats, I'm okay, but the modern wheat is a big no-no for pretty well everybody, actually.
Can we go into that a little bit? Just because I know we've discussed it before.
Yeah, I've always been fascinated by wheat. Yeah. And I couldn't work out why, because it comes up in a lot of conversations. Don't eat wheat, it's bad, it's inflammatory. So the story of wheat's actually a really interesting one, and it's worth unpacking, I think, because what happened in the mid-late 60s was on the back of some studies that had been done and looking at current yields of grains in the world. They realized that on the current population trends, as well as the current yields of certain grains, the world was most likely going to run out of food. Okay. And famine would be an issue, particularly in Africa, Asia, some of these countries. And so on the back of that, there was some scientists in, I think it was Mexico, but he was a Swedish scientist who set about to manipulate the current wheat strain in order to increase yield. Because the current yield of the ancient Emma that was available then in the late 60s was only 1 bushel per hectare. Okay. And through a series of, didn't have GMO back then, so they used radio and chemomutagenesis in order to manipulate the gene, long story short, they managed to increase the yield 8-fold to 8 bushels per hectare. So literally overnight they solved this problem. And in fact, Borglund won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1970 on the back of that research, and probably deservedly so. Yeah. What they didn't realize at the time, which we understand now, is 2 other things changed within that wheat. One of them was the amylopectin A content of wheat, which is the thing that makes your blood glucose go up. That's the carbohydrate content specific to wheat.
Absolutely.
And that tripled. So the carbohydrate content of modern wheat is 3 times what it was. And the other thing that changed was this protein called gliadin. So gluten's made up of 2 proteins, glutathione and gliadin, and the gliadin component was altered to a point where it started to produce a molecule in the gut called zonulin, which then breaks down the gut wall, which then allows
leaky
substances through leaky gut to not be mediated through the cell, but all in straight into the bloodstream. Because it's not mediated through a cell, it goes straight to the liver because it's deemed a toxin, triggers an autoimmune response, and that cascades that whole autoimmune disease, inflammation, etc., etc. So if we go back and look at the whole wheat story, it is worth unpacking, I think, because people need to know some of this stuff. Because if you look at the introduction of that grain sort of into the late 80s, the sort of late 70s, early 80s, and then you mirror that with a lot of the change. And also on the back of that, we had in the late 70s on the McGovern Commission in the US, the new dietary pyramid that came out saying that everybody had to, which again was on the back of some terribly flawed science from the 60s, saying that everybody had to go low fat, high carb.
Okay.
So not only were they consuming more carbohydrates, they're consuming 3 times the amount because the wheat was the one that they promoted most, particularly in the US. And so then we see this up, and again, that's so, I mean, we should look at that modern pyramid today. It's cringeworthy. But what you now see in the late 80s, late 70s, early 80s into the 90s was this huge uptick in autoimmune diseases, in diabetes, how it all parallels some of these sort of things that happened at that time. And we need to know more about that because that's impacting you and me and everybody over the last 30 years negatively. But there's some great people out there now who are starting to disseminate some of this real science behind this to the general public. And that's where the power of podcasting and social media even has been a blessing, because some of this real science is now making its way to a greater population and for the good.
It's amazing how much I'm learning just from listening to podcasts from people who are actually sitting behind the science.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's been an amazing tool that...
Yeah, your Mark Hyman, Supermans, your Asim Malhotras, your Gary Taubes of the world, your Zoe Harkums, your Nina Teicholz's. I mean, there's some incredible scientists out there who are open to all information.
Yeah.
And they're not one side or the other. They will go where the facts lead them. Not buried facts, not stifled fact, not facts that are paid for, sponsored, and, always follow the money, and anything that looks fantastic, and it's always follow the money. But anyway, that's another topic. But I think the good thing is that people like yourself are now more aware of this. You're in a position to impact. You're in a position to influence, as I am, and hence 20 years later, why is John Gloster still in India? Yeah, I'm working with cricket and whatever. But actually, one of my big roles is to make sure that we are disseminating this type of information appropriately to benefit everybody. And I'm very fortunate to be involved with cricket, as I said, a perfect vehicle to disseminate knowledge and to get the right information out there and deliver it to a larger audience.
No, that's amazing. And we've learned so much today. My last question to you, John, and this is something that we ask everyone who's in Elixir, which is, what is your favorite of Elixir Wellness services?
Yeah, I think you probably gathered from my conversation is that, and it's on the back of all this new understanding about what's going to help me the most to target inflammation and impact on things like sleep and health. And so I'm a big fan of the infusions. I'm a big fan of some of the cocktails that we can now sort of build ourselves that are suited to us and what we desire, and then monitoring not just the response, but then monitoring how it impacts us at a blood level. So I'm a big one on doing pre and post bloods. I'm a big one on monitoring my own interventions. But for me, infusions, the athlete sort of in me, and the recovery guy in me will always dive into the into the cryotherapy room. And when we try and get our athletes into those environments as often as possible, we're now understanding the benefits of sort of the hyperbaric environments as well. And as we have learned a lot about the hypoxic environments also to benefit certain individuals and athletes, and also working with hypoxic and hyperbaric.
Yes, in fact, I think Marcus wrote something this morning.
Oh, really?
And he's sent it to me on LinkedIn about how the two correlate and how we can put together protocols.
Yeah, we've had some conversations about that, because at the end of the day, you can be in a hyperbaric environment, but how effective is your system at accepting that new oxygen and that high levels of oxygen? So we need to refine our systems and our pathways. One, to first of all get it into the lung at the alveolar level.
Yeah.
Then how do we attach it to the hemoglobin?
Okay.
And get it bound properly, and then how do we unlock it at the other end? And so where Marcus's love is at his favorite organelle in the world, the mitochondria. So that's ultimately where it's got to end up. How do we then not only get it more efficiently to there in greater volumes, but how do we then unlock it at the mitochondrial level so it can be used effectively?
Makes sense.
So what are the things that help that pathway?
Okay.
And hypoxic training is the one that makes those systems very, very efficient. That's why athletes go to altitude to train.
True.
Because they want to make their oxygen is at the source of all energy production. And so they therefore need their systems to be more efficient at using oxygen.
Body to use it better.
Exactly. So that's the thing that we got to get smarter at. And I think we are. And as I said, you guys are in a perfect position to really push some of those agendas, and I'm really happy for you to be here. So yeah, they're my big three.
Thank you so much. Thank you, John, for being here. I've actually learned a lot today, and I am sure our audience has as well. And for everyone who's listening, thank you for tuning in, and don't forget to subscribe.